You know that quiet sense of relief that appears the moment you close the door behind you. Nothing dramatic happened outside. No conflict, no disaster, but something in your body loosens anyway. The air feels different. Your shoulders drop without you realizing. The noise of the world fades, and for a moment it almost feels like you've returned to somewhere your mind understands. Some people notice this feeling immediately. Others don't think much about it. But if you're the kind of person who often prefers staying home, you've probably experienced this more times than you can count. And yet, this tendency is often misunderstood. People sometimes interpret it as antisocial, or assume it means someone is shy, withdrawn, or avoiding life. In social cultures especially, being out, active, and constantly surrounded by people is often treated as the healthy default. So when someone genuinely enjoys being at home, the behavior can quietly collect labels that don't really fit. But for many people, what's happening has very little to do with fear or avoidance. There's a specific psychology behind people who love staying at home, and it's rarely explained correctly. Because the preference isn't just about liking comfort or disliking crowds. In many cases, it's connected to how a person's mind processes stimulation, emotion, and social energy. Psychologists have known for a long time that human nervous systems vary in sensitivity. Some brains naturally filter stimulation easily. Others absorb far more of it. Conversations, background noise, emotional signals from people, subtle tension in a room. All of this requires processing. Research in personality psychology, particularly work related to introversion and sensory processing, suggests that some individuals experience social environments as neurologically louder. Not necessarily unpleasant, just intense. When that happens, home becomes something more than a location. It becomes a regulation space, a place where the brain finally stops scanning. If you feel the video relatable, do like the video. We might not see each other again, so don't forget to subscribe. In everyday life, your mind is constantly doing small calculations, reading expressions, predicting reactions, adjusting behavior. Even enjoyable social experiences require this. The brain's social networks are active the entire time. But when someone who processes deeply returns to a familiar environment, the nervous system shifts. Predictability replaces uncertainty. Cognitive load drops. The mind no longer has to monitor everything, and the result often feels like relief. This is one reason people who enjoy staying home are often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal. Internally, it can feel more like recovery. There's another layer to this that often develops earlier in life. Many people who strongly value their home environment grew up in situations where they had to become highly aware of their surroundings. Sometimes the environment was chaotic, sometimes emotionally complex, sometimes simply busy and overwhelming. When that happens repeatedly, the brain adapts. It learns to monitor people carefully, to read moods quickly, to anticipate changes. These skills can be useful later in life. They often show up as empathy, observation, or emotional intelligence. But they also mean the nervous system spends a lot of time on. And when a system has been on for long enough, it naturally seeks places where it can switch off. For some people, that place becomes home. Not necessarily because home is exciting. In fact, the opposite is usually true. Home is predictable, quiet, contained. The brain understands the environment completely. Nothing unexpected is likely to happen. In psychological terms, predictability is deeply calming for the nervous system. Studies on stress and environmental psychology repeatedly show that humans relax more easily in spaces they can control. Lighting, noise, pace, interaction. At home, all of this becomes adjustable. That sense of control is powerful even if people don't consciously think about it. Of course, none of this means people who love staying home dislike others. That assumption is one of the most common misunderstandings. Most individuals who enjoy solitude still value connection. They still care deeply about friends, family, and meaningful conversations. The difference is usually in dosage. Some nervous systems recharge through stimulation. Others recharge through quiet. Neither pattern is better, they're simply different calibrations. If anything, the world tends to reward one more visibly than the other. Outgoing behavior is easy to see and measure. Quiet processing happens internally, so it's often mistaken for absence. But there's another interesting layer here that doesn't get talked about very often. People who enjoy staying home frequently have very active inner worlds. When external stimulation decreases, the brain doesn't necessarily become idle. In many cases, the opposite happens. Reflection increases. Ideas connect. Memories replay and reorganize. Creativity often appears in these quieter states. Neuroscience research on the brain's default mode network shows that when people are not actively engaged with the outside world, the mind begins integrating experiences, imagining possibilities, and making sense of life events. In other words, what looks like doing nothing can actually be deep mental activity. This is part of the paradox. The same trait that makes someone leave social environments earlier can also allow them to process life more thoroughly. But like most psychological patterns, it comes with trade-offs. A home-centered life can feel peaceful, but it can also become comfortable enough that the outside world starts to feel heavier than it really is. Not dangerous, just effortful. The brain likes efficiency. If it discovers an environment where energy expenditure is low and emotional safety is high, it will naturally gravitate toward it. That doesn't mean the person lacks curiosity or courage. It simply means the nervous system has learned where it rests best. And rest, psychologically speaking, is not a small thing. Many people move through life slightly overstimulated without realizing it. Their attention is constantly divided, their emotions are pulled in multiple directions. They rarely give their minds time to reset. People who value staying home often understand something about this instinctively. They know what it feels like when the noise finally fades. At the same time, preferring home isn't a sign of deeper wisdom or superiority either. Some people genuinely thrive on movement, crowds, and constant interaction. Their brains regulate through activity rather than stillness. Human psychology has room for both. Different nervous systems, different balances. But if you've ever felt that quiet sense of restoration in your own space, there's a good chance your mind simply processes the world deeply enough that pauses become important. Not as an escape, as recalibration. And once you notice that pattern in yourself, a lot of small moments from the past start making more sense. Why certain environments drained you faster than others. Why you sometimes needed silence after perfectly good days. Why being alone didn't always feel lonely. There's usually a logic to it, even if no one ever explained it that way before. Because what looks simple on the surface, someone choosing to stay home, often reflects an entire nervous system, learning how to balance the outside world with the inner one. And for many people, that balance is still something they're quietly figuring out. If some of this felt familiar, there are probably a few other patterns in your mind that follow the same logic. Most people never notice them at first, but once you do, it changes the way you see yourself a little, and sometimes the way you see other people too.